Travelex is an international kind of like travel money banknotes type service. And what happened is that back in 2014, late 2014, you can check on the news archive, we started a very ambitious digital transformation program. And the digital international payments was part of it, which was formally started in 2015, amongst other digital endeavors. Then by 2017, we launched our first product called Wire UK, so it's direct to customer. If you must ask me, it is like TransferWise. It is like World First and like World Remit, so I'm not going to deny that, okay. So, and because we were like that, but we were a few years late, it wasn't very good or very successful. Again, there's no denying of that. But then what we did was, like all agile organizations, we pivoted. So we quickly thought about, okay, it's not going to work well or it hasn't worked well. What should we do next? So we pivoted from a direct to customer into a B2B2C. So we went to serve large financial institutions, which Travelex has a lot of existing contacts. And then we helped them to provide a really good international money transfer service. So now, all of a sudden, financial institutions in UK, US, Australia, can all provide something as good as TransferWise, World First, and World Remit. And that was really great. It was quite successful. But that was a successful pivot. We didn't stop there. And so we signed a partnership deal with Samsung Pay and back in Q1 2018. And we started on the journey that we're about to tell you. So we're not going to gloss over and say it's just very successful. We're going to tell you stage by stage all the insider story. All the names are being wiped out, so do not try to refer back to specific people, please. So we start with Q1. Q1 was where everyone were, like Travelex responded to the RFP of Samsung Pay. They were looking to have international money transfer service on the app. As you know, again, Samsung Pay is like Android Pay and like Google Pay and like Apple Pay. It's mainly about using your phone to make physical payments. Then, but they want to have more use cases for the cards that are being stored on the app. So one of them is to say, what can they do things in the app with the stored card? The answer is, one of the answers is, let's use it for international payments. So they put out an RFP, Travelex went in, they liked our story, they liked what we've been doing, they liked how we pivoted and how we were agile, and they decided to partner with us. So that was Q1, 2018. It was actually quite far away, if you think about that. When it came to 2019, don't jump that fast. So Q2 2018, a classic agile fashion, let's do it. We have signed it, the deal is here, let's just start doing things. The first question the product and engineering team say is, okay, good, do what? What are we going to do? It's exciting, but what exactly is this partnership about? So we quickly went to the commercial team and said that, what did you agree back in the Samsung conference room? So we got some data, we got some people's scribbles on Notepad, with a lot of drawings on the side, by the way, and some high-level workshop output in the form of minutes, and looked at the RFP and said, okay, we kind of know what needs to be done. It's very similar to what we have built for our B2B2C pivot anyway, because that's why we won the contract and partnership. So we just said, okay, from a platform point of view, this is what the end-to-end journey looks like on Samsung Pay. And we say that, okay, we need to do these API changes. We need to have these new platform logics, like how to handle the Samsung's card arriving at us, and we go and take the money and then complete the process. There are some new third-party integrations, let's say, and some updates to it. For example, fraud check, because Samsung Pay is a very open app. There are lots of fraudsters trying to game the system. So we are going to have a new fraud detection integration. And we will say, hey, it's not just launching for Samsung Pay. In the future, there might be other similar apps or financial institutions coming to us. Or we might expand this service to other geographies like UK, Australia, Eurozone, UAE. So let's have switchers and adapters so that we are ready for more clients and more geos. Then it's very simple, isn't it? We did Agile, we're going to do Agile again. So JFDI, Agile, Scrum, we just get started. we kind of know the stories, we kind of know the end-to-end journey, write epics, write stories, get cracking. The sooner you crack, the sooner you get on with it, the sooner you finish. And by the way, like people were still working on other B2B2C projects, so they have to balance. It's like part-time job. You share some time on the Samsung Pay project, you share some time on the other clients, and not all the product owners and engineers were involved. They were involved part-time. Some of them would come later. Some of them were started earlier. Well, and then people always ask, like the CEO will always ask you, this is a very important project. It's with Samsung Pay. It's a very important partnership. How long will this take? It's asked like 5 times a day. So we try not to go to the toilet because we meet him, we will get asked the same question. Then we just look and say, okay, surely a few integrations, a few logic change, some new APIs. There's some dependencies. We'll put a 20% contingency. Ready by Christmas? It's Q2 and Christmas Q4. Surely that's enough time. What's the problem? Well, okay. Q3, so 3 months later, things get interesting. There's some setbacks. So let's think about that. Okay, it's actually bigger than we thought. It's not the 5 epics and 30 stories we had in mind. So, okay, everyone clear that that's. Everyone works on Samsung Pay partnership full time. Let's get some near-shore engineering teams involved. So we looked around and then we found a really good near-shoring engineering partnership. And we started to get on board with 3 to 4 Scrum teams on their side. And then you start to notice stories started to slip. The epics were not happening as quickly as we would like them to be, especially for third-party integrations. And there's a reason why that's the case, because you need stakeholders. It's not just an engineering and product decision. We can write the stories, but the stories, requirements, acceptance criteria, the readiness to go into development or engineering implementation needs the compliance and regulatory, the data privacy, the fraud teams to get involved. We can do something and then they can come and say that, no, what you do is not street ready. You go to the street, fraudsters will come and they will trump you anytime. And likewise, finance, IT, operations have to start to get warmed up. For a simple reason, we can design a very slick process end-to-end on the app. Operationally, it could be a nightmare. It might lead to, let's say, a 5% failure rate, and people will jam all the customer support line. We have to design, if you think about what it means, and design our end-to-end journey, design our APIs, design our logic in different ways, so it's more foolproof. It is easier for errors to come up before an order is submitted, thereby reducing the error rate or the customer support call rate. We start to get these stakeholder teams to provide the requirements. So we will have an epic. We invite them in, look at the stories, tell us the addendums that are needed. It's very simple, isn't it? It is still very much, let's do it, and then when there's a setback, let's get people involved and get the story done. Get the story resized, rescoped, and move on. But then what you find is that at some stage towards the end of Q3, more and more people get involved, more stakeholders. And when you have more stakeholders, you've got more requirements or acceptance criteria, there are more opinions. And with opinions, like a Christmas dinner after the second course and after a few glasses of port, you have more conflicts. When you have more conflicts, you have more meetings. And then you go back to more meetings not resolved, don't worry, get more people involved. And then get more people involved somehow just continues. And at some stage, you have like 10, 15, 17 groups of stakeholders involved at different levels. So far, I think you have noticed it's about Travelex. Travelex writes the epics, Travelex writes the stories, Travelex implements, and somehow it is delivered. But it's actually not that simple because Samsung Pay is on the other side of the equation. So they were trying to have a more hands-off or contract-based working model. So we agree on the UX UI spec, we agree on the API spec, we have some product scope deck, and then each party can get on with our life. We do our agile, they do our agile, and at some stage it's all done and it's happy ending for everyone. But actually, by Q3, it's not like that. So these things may be updated once every 2 months. But then they have moved in one direction, we have moved the other, so we have to find a way to bring us back together. It's highly inefficient, and this kind of static documentaries and artifacts are insufficient, were insufficient. So we decided, hey, what should we do? Slack, emails, joint Jira and conference, trust me, we tried them all. We had them all, and then it still didn't work. For one reason. Even though we were partners, when we moved left in our thinking and they moved right in their thinking, no one thought, let's try to meet in the middle. Or worse still, no one said that actually, Travelex should have gone right on this one, but Central Page should have gone left on that one and get to a happy ending together. So everyone was stuck on their positions, and there were places where gaps surfaced, conflicts surfaced between Travelex and Samsung Pay. So, Q4, this time last year, literally, yes, go on.
I mean, hindsight's a great thing, but with what you've said, do you guys believe that if you did a sort of fast-paced discovery at the beginning, do you think you would have avoided these challenges that you mentioned on the previous slide?
Could do. There's some reflections afterwards, and I think there's something that comes along your line, and that we took that learning as well. So this time around, when we go into phase 2 collaboration with Samsung Pay, it was different. Let's talk before we walk. Let's talk ahead of writing stories, epics, and starting implementation. So there were definitely learnings, similar to what you have just said. So I think what people realized by Q4 is, as I said, at some stage, there were many stakeholder groups. There were 17 official work streams. One work stream could be front-end product and engineering, back-end product and engineering, operations, finance, treasury, compliance and regulatory. Each of them is a work stream that has to be satisfied. 2 of them were directly owned by product and engineering. Of course, the other 15 work streams would have requirements that would feed into product and engineering, so that the product, in the form of the APIs, the logics, and the app, would fit with all the requirements or the acceptance criteria. And then we had to say, okay, white flag up is not simple. It's actually very complex. Complexity was underestimated. So there's a number. The key thing is that with 17 work streams, we had multi-dependencies across many work streams. One simple decision could involve 3 to 4 work streams. Some of them could involve 7 to 8 work streams. And when that happens, it's next to impossible to make a decision. So here it's like operations team need to set up efficient processes, but they need us to help them design together and update how we treat the payments. Or the IT team needs to set up accounting system or reconciliation and settlement, but they need to make sure that operations team feed the right information. And by the way, the product and engineering team needs to have the right database and right data feed so that we can feed the right data to operations team, then to feed to the accounting process. You see, in that simple example, first one, operations and products and engineering. The second one, IT team, work with finance team on accounting, needing the operations team to work, and that still comes back to product and engineering. A lot of things comes back to product and engineering eventually. So one simple example, 5 work streams. So what happened there, literally this time last year, we flew our US colleagues for the Thanksgiving to UK and said there's no Thanksgiving because it's not very nice, no thanks, and just give us your time. So we set people down in a room in a round circle, and the circle was very big, there were 40 people. And we said that what is the actual scope? I think it comes back to your question, just 2 quarters late. So what is the actual scope behind the commercial agreements? The commercial agreements is 10 lines. You add the notes and the meeting minutes, it may be 50 lines. But that is hardly enough to scale the full width, breadth, and depth of the actual scope. And people need to talk about options because scope is a description. But there are many moving parts. Not every description is hard, is a must-have. Some of them is should have or nice to have, or there are MVP solutions somewhere, whereas the others, an MVP is not good enough. You must go into a very, very full solution mode. So everyone sat down, conversation, questions, discussions, interdependencies, worries. Let's just throw it all up. Let's just whiteboard them, post-it notes them, and write them down afterwards. And the second thing, apart from discussing the scope in an open fashion, you say that let's all recognize in the room that scope was complex. Because if you're in denial and say that it's true, it's very simple, you do this, this, and this, and it's job done, there's no chance people will come to the table and continue to discuss and resolve the obstacles together. And then after that, you will say, hey, we kind of know what we want to achieve, the scope. Let's just find the deepest problem, the gaps, and start addressing it together. And that was Q4. You could see that we started in earnest in Q2. By Q4, we were just trying to restart ourselves. 3 quarters of churn, maybe that's like a 1 quarter of inefficient or kind of wastage. It's a pity. Come new year, new partnership. So internally within Travelex, we kind of like reset ourselves. Came Q1, we reset ourselves with Samsung Pay as well. Because when there's a problem, it's usually not one party's fault. It's usually both parties has something to kind of like, both parties would have some responsibility. So back in Q3 and Q4, we think about that, the organizations, basing on those API documents, the spec, the scope, descriptions, those are highly static artifacts, infrequently updated, and when you write your viewpoints down, it's more unlikely for you to change it. And therefore, when you have gaps, it's very difficult to reconcile and come together to find a happy solution. And that is where the disjointment basically widened and widened and widened over 2 quarters. And that led to a lot of frustration on both parties, inefficiency and uncertainty. And it's not just about our over-reliance on the static artifacts. It's also that the ways of work is inherently different between Travelex and Samsung Pay. We were relatively small, we could move agilely, we could move very fast, we could pivot. Samsung Pay has an app, has a lot of users in US. They have design patterns established. They cannot just change or update or widen the design pattern for us, which is a relatively small part of their app. And therefore, they prefer a big bang approach and therefore all the static artifacts. Static artifacts gives them confidence, gives them certainty across their multiple streams of engineers, product owners, and marketing, etc. Whereas Travelex is more CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and we say that, hey, during CI/CD, when you have a problem, let's sit down together, resolve it, and move on. But that doesn't go well with documentation, big bang, and a big life cycle. So what's happened is that, hey, it's not working out. But Samsung Pay was really willing to work with us. So what they did is they changed the team responsible for this project from the US team to the South Korea headquarters team. They put in the best team they had to continue with the partnership. And when we said that, great, new partnership, new opportunities. But remember, when you have a new partnership, it's either opportunity or threat. We saw an opportunity and we did 3 things. Number 1, let's talk ways of work. Let's talk about how we work, how they work, and where the common standpoint is, and how to address all these problems with static documentation. Number 2, the regular touch points. In this case, it's meetings, conference calls between Travelex in the UK, and now Samsung Pay in South Korea, in Seoul. And change those regular meetings from project plan catch-up, which is, okay, we've done this story, you've done that story, okay, doesn't help, to let's solve problems together. We respect the fact that they're trying to take a big bang approach, but then as part of their big bang design, they will have questions. Let's solve those questions. Let's not pretend that there's no questions. And the third one, let's meet face-to-face. So towards the end of March, we flew to the Seoul Samsung City, sat down with them solidly for 3 days, solved problems, made agreements, and got drunk together. And actually, the first 2 parts was okay. The most important part was getting drunk together. Not because, well, of course, the drinks were very nice, by the way, there. But the most important thing, by getting drunk together, you got to know each other. Once you know each other, once you put faces behind the stories, you can talk more fluidly. And that really helped. That basically doubled our productivity. So, came Q2. We're now working better with Samsung Pay, but on our side, as the 17 work streams work together, there were more things being uncovered the first time. There were more acceptance criteria. There were more constraints. There were more problems. Problem, requirements. And interestingly, fundamentals were still outstanding. Maybe, Steve, you can provide that point.
Yeah, so this is when I joined the organisation. Forgive the husky voice. And I reserve the right to cough lightly into my crook of my elbow. So coming on board, so the fundamentals that we refer to here are things as pivotal as contracts with upstream acquirers, contracts with downstream providers, and the issue that it caused was that our colleagues in commercial didn't realise the impact that the decisions that they were making were having on the product that we were developing and the engineering teams that were developing it. So because the contracts weren't signed, we were kind of the other side of the contracts, our partners were calling the shots and imposing decisions upon us that were having radical impacts on what we were looking to deliver. And it was one of those things. It's like, this is one of the things that should have been done 6 months ago, and we should have had a clear vision on this, and we could have been able to design and develop it properly. But the other thing going on to the dependencies multiplying and hitting the milestones and all the work streams collaborating, because of that, the tangible impact of that was our Jira hygiene and rigour around our agile processes was really poor, and it was like an invisible impact that people hadn't really recognised. So the engineering teams were during the sprint chasing product owners for more clarity on the stories that were in the sprint backlog, but because of that, the product owners weren't able to complete the stories for subsequent sprints. Sprints weren't being closed off after 2 weeks. Stories were being routinely carried over from sprint to sprint with no recognition of whether they were still required, because the deliverables were changing on a weekly basis, and it was stagnating and really impacting our ability to deliver.
I think it's very important to say that, like as Steve said, when we're in the Q2, we were supposed to launch in October. That means end of Q3/start of Q4. When pressure mounted, what people will say is that they want their decision to prevail, because their decision means minimizing work on their work stream, so that their work stream could hit the target, whereas other work stream would be jeopardized. But then it became fairly kind of heated. Everyone was trying to protect their work stream so that, hey, we meet the deadline, we were good. And this is normal nature as well. This is office work. This is what happens, especially in a complex projects. So what happens is that there would be discussions being made, decisions were sometimes made, and then for decisions that were made, they would be remade so that work streams who were disadvantaged had a chance to correct it for the better. And at some stage, what happened is that in the end, the executives within Travelex had to get involved and finalize decisions and just force it to move on. But you know what that means? Work streams were the SMEs, they were the subject matter experts. With the work streams, under normal circumstances, under normal time frame, they would reach an optimal solution. When executives were forced to come in to finalize decisions, they will have to make decisions based on their higher level understanding, based on who they heard, what they heard, but not necessarily through experience or or detailed investigation. So not all decisions were good, but we had just have to move on. Otherwise, if we kept going in this decision cycle, we would never have made it.
One of the factors from this period was we were our own worst enemies. So we would give estimates for pieces of work, but because I work with really dedicated, amazing people, we'd always try and go the extra mile to deliver over and above. And the ramification of that was that people never believed us when we said things were unachievable. It's one of the things that I never thought I'd ever have to do in my career, but to explain to people that having a 5-day task and then putting 5 people on it doesn't mean it's going to be completed in a day. And I never ever thought I'd have to explain that to another rational, sentient human being. But as I say, we were our own worst enemies, and got to a point where when we said things weren't achievable, we just weren't believed, and there was a lot of pressure put on us to do extra overtime and have all of our engineering colleagues working both days over a weekend in order to meet really unrealistic goals.
Just to clarify, so the executives there got involved due to the teams not being able to agree on a decision. Is that the correct understanding?
So the executives were there to make sure that we would move on as efficiently as possible. So they recognized that because of this kind of complexity and the work streams not being able to agree on solutions quickly enough, efficiency was being impeded. So what they did was that, how do we make decisions so that it could go into an implementation mode? We have to go full on into implementation mode. That's what they recognized, and therefore that's how they got involved.
So they were making product decisions?
In some way, yes, but not in the detailed way, not in the acceptance criteria of stories or epics, but key decisions, as Steve mentioned, which is, let's say, signing a contract. Some of the contract terms would have implications on product or operations or finance. But rather than going through that in a 6-week cycle, which normally how long it took, they would just say, okay, let's just agree on this compromise with the third party. These 2 points are the remaining points, are the only points we will fight, and we'll fight our corner. And therefore, on that basis, even though the contract was about to be signed but not quite signed, let's start working, let's plan it out based on those assumptions.
So I was going to call this slide Panic Sets In, but I went with Micromanagement Reigns instead. So we went from weekly meetings to daily meetings, to twice daily meetings, and then back to daily meetings, but they were longer and had more people in them, all asking the same questions. And a point I raised several times, sometimes with profanity, was when am I going to find time to do the work? And we used Jira and set up a myriad of views in Jira, but one of the outcomes of the twice daily meetings was I had to translate those into spreadsheets and email them to people on a daily basis, which didn't help. But it's a warts and all talk, but then this is my favourite bit actually. Prioritisation and pushback as well. In Q3 when we were delivering in Q3.
End of Q3 or go
Yeah,
live.
that's right. So we got to a point where we had the realisation set in that we weren't going to be able to do everything. There was a perception that we were time-bending magicians, that we could just deliver whatever was asked of us at whatever point, and they could just keep feeding things into the team and not take anything out, and everything would just get done. But it was at this point in the project that it dawned on other work streams that wasn't the case. So we were able to push back and define a very clear, prioritised backlog for delivery, and we weren't going to change it for anyone. but also at the same time, because of the relationships that we had with the third parties, it was always very fluid as to what we could achieve, and this is including Samsung. So it was last minute pivots and agreements just to get things through the door. One of the telling points from this was, I think it was in Q2, we'd done some user testing and published the results internally, and the NPS wasn't great, but it was only at this point that somebody understood what that actually meant. So there was a lot of rejigging of trying to improve the NPS score and the UX of the app itself, and Samsung allowed us to take the lead on several of the features within the app to make the whole UX better, which was a big win for us.
So I think Steve was doing his best to describe this in a very kind of vivid manner, but I think the pain could only be felt by people who were actually in the Q3 process. It was literally, you could see the engineers working from early in the morning till late night, 7 days a week. Product people with the other work stream leads went from meeting to meeting to help people understand where we are, to help people understand that we were on track, or we would be on track as long as people agree on the scope and don't change it again and do not have last minute. And there were times when there were genuine change in scope that if we did not accept those changes, we would not be able to have a secure product to launch. Then we would have to then agree on accepting those changes, but something has to come out. So even though we say they were not changing it, the fact is, when something really important to change, people had to understand by here, which is around August time, something goes in, something else goes out. And it took people some time to get used to that idea. Rather than surely working a bit longer, working more hours, you will be able to squeeze that in.
So during this period in the product and engineering meetings, I referenced the St. Crispin's Day speech from Henry V a lot. So Google it afterwards.
Okay. Anyway. But we did launch on time. So we did manage on it wasn't even on the 1st of October, it's like 27th or 28th of September, we tried to have a trickle of a 5 or 10% volume through. It went well, there were no bugs, there were no one not being able to access the system, go through the end-to-end process. It simply worked. And it was a happy ending. So you can see some of the screenshots here. People come in the first time, sees a stepping stone page, can get started, a very simple UI to see the quote, choose the delivery method, see the fees. So transparency is quite high up on our design principles. So we try to showcase everything, the rate, the delivery method, any more service fees than the total. There are no hidden figures. And then people could then enter, send information, beneficiary information, and provide more documentation if they were high-risk orders or high-risk customers. And all this, of course, had automatic verification on screen. So if you, let's say, type your date of birth to be 2019, we will kind of highlight and say that, sure, you have typed something wrong, rather than going to the last page and then ask you to come back again. And of course, you see a very comprehensive review sheet so that we meet all the compliance requirements before people click pay. And once you click pay, we're using the infrastructure of Samsung Pay to take the funds and of course request some biometric verifications, either their PIN or their iris or their fingerprint. So that it's like whoever's making that $500 transaction to Honduras is indeed the phone's rightful owner. And of course, people can then check on the order records and do their own admin. So I think you can see all here is a really nice app. And when people see a nice app, they are aware of all the effort that came in. But then I hope that in the past few slides, the 7 to 8 slides, the real end-to-end journey, it wasn't an easy ride. And the ride was particularly tough when it came to Q2 and Q3 of this year. So there were I think between Steve and I, we had 3 key learnings. The first learning is that going agile is fine, it's very, very important, but so is program management from the outset. So it's a funny thing to say because sometimes people think that program or project management is so waterfall. Once you have that, it's not going to work. When you have agile, you have product owners and engineers going through the whole sequence, doing the show and launching products. But I think for projects or partnerships of this complexity, where there were 17 work streams or stakeholder groups, all trying to achieve their own things, all trying to make other people meet their own demands, there will be conflicts, there will be kind of like never-ending meetings, never-ending decisions, never-ending re-decisions. You need someone like a program management board to say, let's everyone stop here. What is the exact scope? That's what we did, not in Q2 2018, but in Q4 2018. We lost those 2 quarters' time. So it's not necessarily the old style program management, as in you have a super long Gantt chart and you say that this is the launch date. But the program management that fits with Agile to help us empower the Agile, bring in discipline, stop product owners from going to meeting after meeting after meeting to the extent that stories could not be written, engineers could not be informed. They had to skip daily stand-up. I think you can provide more information about that. People weren't even going to daily stand-ups.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, sorry. One sentence only. but that's literally it. And when the product owners stopped going to the 15-minute daily stand-up, when they stopped going to the planning sessions for every sprint, things would happen. And things would happen to the product engineering team, and people wouldn't understand. So if you have an understanding program management team who would help us shoulder the burden, allow the product owners and the engineers to go back to do what they need to do first, which is defining stories, defining epics, running them, and then with their free time, go and make product decisions, go and make engineering decisions, they will be infinitely better. And also, apart from that, dependencies. A lot of slippages, as Steve said, because contracts were not properly negotiated and closed down in time, or people came back with new ideas, forcing executives to come in. With program management, you can say that, look, there's a dependency, let me manage it, let me put a schedule in, let me put a meeting in, let us say that this dependency must be resolved within 2 weeks, otherwise the timeline is at risk. Red flagging things, putting green, amber, red on a number of problems would help. And especially it should help people understand that it's not the product owners and the engineers being slow, being unproductive. There were other things causing them or forcing them to slow down, like this particular contract point not being made, such that they couldn't write the scope on the epic and the story and start implementing. The next one is ways of work, both externally and internally. For a high-stake partnership like this, going across organization, you have to think about the efficiency. We didn't think about that. Again, we had used the static documents. We just thought that those would mean we could reach a mutual agreement and we could kind of like develop, and then we would meet at the end of the day and then it would all work. Didn't work at all. And it's not just because Samsung Pay was more waterfall, more enterprise, we were more agile. Even for two companies coming into partnership with agile methodology, it's not always the same agile. They will have a different stuff agile, we have a different stuff agile. They will have a different way of prioritizing to cut the stories and epics, or to solve problems when a story is in progress. And those differences would add up. At some stage, they would add up and they would stop the progress being made, and you have to restart again. And that's what happened to Travelex in Q1 2019. So the key learning is, as soon as both teams start doing serious work, meet together, resolve problems, define ways of work, see each other in their faces, get drunk together, establish that kind of working relationship. Not joking. If we had done this in Q3 or Q4 2018, we would not have to change the team we worked with in Samsung Pay. Somehow people really like meetings, because meeting is a good way of telling people what you think, and then hoping to get people to see your way of thinking and resolve it in your favor. So therefore, each team would in turn organize their own meeting to share their own meeting on the same problem. So that really needs to be cut out, because otherwise, again, coming back to product and engineering team selfishly, we would be engulfed in all these meetings, and we wouldn't know what to do for another 6 weeks until someone comes in and says that let's just cut it out. Having ways of work to decide on how to resolve problem, who makes a decision on which kind of problems, would help cut out meetings, everyone agree, take up the decision, and just get on with it. And then, once you get on, you can then, in an agile fashion, iterate on it, rather than trying to get for the best decision up front, and then live with that for the next 2 years. So ways of work to us is who gets to make what decisions, when should questions be raised, and how often. If you don't agree with a decision, how do you dispute or escalate? How do you report progress so people know, are you going on track, or are you going slow, and what's causing slowness, and then address dependencies and how to talk to each other and have co-working tools. These are all ways of work, just to stop people doing it their own ways, spurring bad news, or not having a channel to voice things out in a very secure manner.
So I'll just after put these down, just mentally reviewing just how crazily fundamental both of those things are. Understand the value of the product within the organisation, because you have so many conversations with different work streams, and the product was always the inferior partner, and we both sides of the conversation were doing themselves a disservice by maintaining that dynamic within the relationship, and we really had to fight to get some kind of parity in the conversations that we were having, and try to make people understand other work streams that by engaging us early and staying engaged, they'd be better at their jobs, we'd be better at our jobs, and in turn they'd be better at their jobs again, and we just make both of our lives slightly easier. And then the other one was understanding the value of the process. When things go awry, don't abandon Agile and just look to use some kind of chaotic process to get things done. Lean into it. Use it to support what you're doing. As I say, it's as crazy and as simple as it sounds. It's one of the lessons that I've learned from the experience. But I'll be frank, I'm unsure how much the organisation has learned. Because we had a retrospective on the project, and you're getting the findings of the retrospective before the retrospectives happened, because that's what it feels needs to be reported. You just don't understand, and you're not going to get better at what you do if you don't take a self-critical look at yourself and go through things at this level of detail and understand what you could have done better. So that's the big learning for me from this.
So that's it. It's about kind of like what we did with in the Samsung Pay partnership, how it unfolded, all the kind of insider stories, the challenges. We didn't try to gloss over and say it's very easy, we did it, it was amazing, come and work for us, because it will all be easy ride. It's the tough ride, but it's a tough ride that's worth the value. You don't want to go on a roller coaster ride where it's just like flat, one circle and then come back. You want to go through this. And I think that for all the product owners and engineers and all the work streams who really participate in this process, most of them had matured a lot. So now we are going to the second phase of our Samsung Pay partnership. We were really approaching this from a different way. Ways of work discussions. We had a retrospective with them. We had a retrospective internally. Of course, the degree of learning is different for different people who participated. But then we were now saying that what is the scope? What are the hard decisions? What are the upfront work, let's say on the compliance and legal side, that we should do first, such that we could feed into the product and engineering epics more efficiently downstream, rather than then you have a big problem, then you have a 6-week meeting, and then the engineers didn't know what to do for 6 weeks. So we have absorbed the learnings, we are now implementing them, and to be honest with you, this is an iterative learning. There were like 50 to 60 lessons that we could extract from this long journey. Maybe 10 to 15 would have been genuinely learned and put into the next phase. So there were like 40 to 50 that were still on the table. We will learn them progressively or relearn them progressively in our second phase. And when we do the big retrospective at the end of the second phase, we'll pick up more of them. And that is how I see the organization to iteratively learn from each project, learn from each initiative, and become more mature in terms of how we apply agile product management.
Thanks.
That's it. Thanks.